All right, everyone, we're going to get started with the session. So this is Andrew Nesbitt, the creator of Ecosystems, and he's going to talk to you about GitHub Actions security for Python packages.
Am I on? Yes, we're good. Hello, welcome. This is my first ever PyCon, so thank you very much for having me. I'm having a great time, a little bit jet lagged, but we'll push through that. As Steph said, my name is Andrew. I live in England. I'm a package manager nerd, a open source data miner, dependency graph cartographer, critical infrastructure hobbyist, and also a poodle farmer. And everyone's brains are probably a little bit mushy by now after 2 to 4 days of conferencing. So I thought we'd have a little palate cleanser. I'll show you, this is my army of poodles. I don't know how long this GIF goes on. Have we already gone through it? It's basically like open source is free as in puppies, so enjoy. As Seth mentioned, I work on a project called Ecosystems, and I collect data about every different package manager and the packages within them, their dependencies, and then I also mine hundreds of millions of public open source projects for the dependencies they use and try to connect them all together into one big graph full of dependencies and full of pain and horror. And I thought I'd share a little bit of that with you today, specifically focused on GitHub Actions. You also might have seen my blog, and so I pulled like the most popular posts I have, and they are all the jokey ones that aren't particularly technically relevant, but Sandwich Bill of Materials is one of my personal favorites, as it's literally a spec written for how you would describe the ingredients that went into making a sandwich. This talk is going to be based on 2 blog posts that I have written about how GitHub Actions works or doesn't work for various kinds of configurations and footguns and the security implications of these things. And I've kind of just smushed them together, but I do encourage you to go and check out these 2 blog posts because they have much more kind of details and go into like the full picture of various reasons why you might think twice about heavily depending on all of the features in GitHub Actions and also how resilient this could be going forward. So, GitHub Actions. Can I get a show of hands for people who are using GitHub Actions? That's quite a lot. Almost all of you, maybe. Turns out there is a lot of people that use GitHub Actions in the Python community. I pulled a list of 864,000 packages that I had indexed from PyPI. I found approximately 400,000 of those declared that they were on GitHub. Many of them came from the same repository, so the number of unique repositories is not exactly that number. So we're kind of drilling down a little bit, and we end up with 350,000 repos, which I then went through to look to see how many of these have a GitHub workflow file in them. Basically trying to just drill down to get to the amount of people in the Python world that are using GitHub Actions, specifically where they're publishing and they're working on Python packages. Now, there's a whole other story about how people are using these for their applications as well, but I've only got 30 minutes, so we're going to try and keep this thing slightly self-contained. Also note that 11% of these packages that I scanned are using Travis CI, and Travis CI stopped providing builds for open source projects 3 years ago. So there's 11% there that have no CI, even though it looks like they do, which is just like the tip of the iceberg. This is brilliant. So why are people using GitHub Actions? Most people are going to be using it for running their tests, which is totally reasonable. But quite a lot of people use it for automatically publishing from their GitHub to PyPI. And they're using a workflow. There's a number of different choices of workflows for how they're publishing these things. And I found approximately 56,000 repositories that are using the PyPI GitHub action to publish to PyPI. And about 22% of those are using trusted publishing, which means that the other 78% of them, about 44,000, are still using the kind of long-lived token for publishing from PyPI, which is going to produce some really interesting outcomes when we start looking into how that combines with other features of the GitHub Actions configuration. So what is trusted publishing? Trusted publishing is where you're basically using an OAuth flow to ensure that there aren't any long-lived configuration tokens stored in your CI environment. This means that they're basically only going to live for about 15 minutes, very unlikely to be able to be stolen and reused compared to a long-lived token that basically you've pulled from the PyPI website and then stored in your runtime configuration in GitHub Actions. This is really good. Everyone should be using this. It's basically a great way of kind of ensuring that your build is more secure. And of course, it doesn't mean that it is perfectly secure. So trusted publishing is basically guaranteeing that when something has been built in GitHub Actions and then sent over to PyPI, that the thing that was sent over was sent over. It doesn't necessarily mean that the thing was built is 100% secure. Anything that happened before the process of it being uploaded and being fed to the release worker is fair game for other things to happen along the way. This is often the last step in your build release as well. So we're going to go through some of the various kinds of problems and configuration issues that can be attributed to GitHub Action, or they could be called features of GitHub Actions if you like. And I'm going to pick out a few because there's a lot, and I don't have all day, and you probably would all be asleep by the end of it. One of the first ones is the uses action, and this is a problem because it's basically treating GitHub Actions like a package manager. You're able to declare, I would like to use this workflow as part of my setup, and that workflow could be a GitHub first-party action. It could be a third-party action, and you can declare a version or a range of versions or no version and then just say, I just want the latest one all the time. This is a problem because GitHub Actions is not a package manager, even if it does act like a package manager. And so version 4 of that particular action, although that's a first-party one, let's pick on TJ Actions. Version 41 is a mutable tag. So someone can force push and change or move that tag to another release whilst keeping the same name. Most package managers, once a version has been published, don't allow you to change the contents of that version ever again. This is a problem because if TJ Actions loses control of their repository, someone steals access to it, they can force push and change that version, and then other people are basically picking up a new release without ever really knowing that anything happened. GitHub isn't describing that to you at all. There's also no lock file. So each one of those dependencies that you have in your workflow that is pulling in more workflows and actually kind of having a real dependency resolution process is never recorded. You don't see what's happened. You can't reproduce necessarily what happened. You can't inspect it particularly easily. And you can't validate that the things that were downloaded were what you expected. There's also, it's not a package manager, but if a repository gets deleted or, say, flagged or archived, GitHub Actions then it's disappeared. Like, piece of your infrastructure has just gone without any, there's no recourse, there's no if this happened on PyPI, someone deleted their GitHub repo, the package still stays on PyPI. So you have like a number of issues here that are starting to compound. And we see another problem, which is, the tags are immutable. Lots of things here are moving. I've basically skipped 2 slides here, sorry. I've got a lot more slides than points, potentially. So we have this kind of like combination of the tags are immutable and the transitive dependencies are not pinned, means that you can basically have a chain of individual transitive action dependencies that are moving around freely and kind of basically opening up to a number of different like points of weakness within your infrastructure. As I was putting this talk together, I kind of went digging into how many different compromises have we seen over the past 18 months that involved directly GitHub Action workflows being compromised, which were enabling various kinds of publishing of malicious packages out of the control of the maintainer of those things, and then the knock-on effects of those. So I'm going to go through some of how this happened. One of the most obvious kind of ones that happened that is like a combo of every different bad feature of GitHub Actions is the Ultralytics attack. And it basically had every different feature of GitHub Actions turned on, which enabled the attacker to fork their project, change their workflow scripts, and then open a pull request, which then ran this arbitrary other person's code, which gave them access to their PyPI API key, and thereby allowing the malicious user to publish many different versions, all of which included crypto miners. If you go looking then for exactly that same configuration on PyPI and the repositories that are behind them, there's 1,300 other repositories that have exactly that same setup. I'm not going to list the names here because they're potentially 0 days. But this is, we're past the tip of the iceberg, but we haven't quite gone under the waterline just yet. How bad is this? It could be pretty bad. So I wanted to find out and dive in. So I picked up a tool called zizmor, written by our wonderful friend William down here at the front. Can we get a big hand for William working on zizmor? Zizmor is a wonderful little tool written in Rust, but published on PyPI. Definitely not an abuse of the terms of service there at all. But it basically will act like a linter for your GitHub Actions, and it can run all kinds of different audits and try and find potential problems in the way that you have configured, or say you, anyone, any particular workflow file can tell you, like, here are all of the potential foot guns that you have here. It can run locally, it can run in your CI. It doesn't have to have a network connection either, which is very nice. It means that I can run it aggressively against many, many things. And I did. So I basically took 150,000 repos. I did shallow clones. And I also found that as I did shallow clones of those things, about 20% of these packages, the repo is gone. That's a whole nother talk of, like, there's a load of packages there that don't have a source repository anymore. I basically just went through all of these and ran zizmor and output it into a JSON file. And I also then indexed all of the different uses so that I can see what are the most used third-party and first-party actions across all of these workflows. And I put everything into a SQLite database. I have it all up on GitHub as well so that you can go and check it out and find all kinds of interesting problems over there. I didn't run it on the latest version of zizmor because William very kindly released it like 2 days ago, and I had hotel Wi-Fi and was like, there's no way I can reclone 150,000 repos. So we're on a slightly older version, but I don't believe there was too many audit changes along the way. There's also some limitations. We can't go heavily into introspecting the complete security setup of every repo. I didn't look at kind of like what branch protections are turned on or any other things. I purely looked at just what's in the YAML files, right? Because otherwise we're just going to keep uncovering more and more horrors, and we don't need that right now. So what did I find? 6 audits really stood out. These are particularly painful audits. Excessive permissions, 100,000 repos have excessive permissions turned on. I've also very kindly gone and looked up all the CVEs of GitHub Action workflows that have been published. So these are actions that have had a security advisory published against them and categorized them by which features of GitHub Actions they were using to be targeted by. And we're going to go through some of these. I also basically am ignoring the first-party GitHub Actions. We're going to treat GitHub as being good maintainers of those things and probably not going to get pwned themselves. If that happens, we've got more problems than just what's happening in your CI. That's much worse. We don't need to think about that right now. So we're going to go through some of the particular audits of zizmor that are bad and that you should think about how you use these things. Excessive permissions. This is basically any repo that was created before February 2023 has a different default configuration than newer repositories. What that means is if you have not declared your permissions that are enabled in that workflow explicitly, as in can it read contents, can it write contents, can it there's loads of different potential permissions that you can set. If you don't set any, then they will gain a lot of extra permissions, which then, if a malicious actor is able to run that workflow, can do more things with that token that is available in the workflow than you would potentially want. Because this is kind of a legacy problem, that's why you see so many packages that have this, because they potentially haven't even updated or thought about their workflows. They've never heard from GitHub to say, oh, by the way, we haven't changed this default for your repository because it was older, but you probably should go do that. So this one is interesting because then you get into a place where it's like, oh, well, if this is here, we can also use this when it's combined with other problems. Unpinned uses. This is the package manager problem again. The declaration that we've described a use using a mutable tag, like this could change at any point, and it is not reliable enough to say this will always resolve to the same version that you expect. And this is exactly what happened with TJ Actions, where someone was able to force push and move that tag to something else, which was malicious, without anyone really realizing what happened. And that has 85,000 repos. 85,000. Again, this is kind of like a feature of GitHub that has kind of not been fully supported because it isn't really a package manager, but it has enough package manager shape that's kind of like, oh, that's neat, but there's none of the infrastructure underneath it to really support it. Template injection. We're just straight into just inject stuff into my bash. And one of the most regular ones that shows up here is take the title of a pull request and just feed it straight into bash, which then anyone can make a pull request, right, on a public repo, and you can put whatever you like in there, and then just have that executed as part of that workflow run, which is pretty disastrous. A lot of different fields can be submitted and used, and like we see people will be saying like, oh, I'm going to use the title to try and automatically label this. And of course, then you end up in a place where the users are able to just inject stuff straight into that labeling, which on the face of it might not seem that concerning, but as we'll see later, those things can start to be chained together. Again, 21,000 repos have this template injection issue. Use trusted publishing. Kind of an audit, kind of a suggestion. This is basically saying, like, we found publishing scripts that don't use trusted publishing. So it's the name of the audit is a suggestion rather than the declaration of the problem. And as I said, kind of at the start, there's a good number of repos that are still using the more traditional kind of long-lived token, including some very, very popular packages. And these packages, if anyone's in here that knows any of the maintainers of some of these packages listed here, you should definitely go to them and say, hey, use zizmor, and zizmor will tell you that you need to fix these things. I'm going to have to fly through this last bit. Cache poisoning. So this is basically one of the main things that is used to chain vulnerabilities across different actions. Because the way that caches work in GitHub is that within a run, one workflow can basically write to a cache and then another one can read it. So if you can write to the cache, you can potentially poison it and then have a different workflow that you had no access to run in actually execute and use that cache that you were able to write to. This one is what is used often to be able to chain a very boring looking action over into something else, a different workflow file, which can be then used to take kind of keys that were only described in that other workflow file, even if like you really never expose that to third parties to be able to run them. Again, 15,000 repositories here. These lists are significant. There's a lot of projects. It's not like there's a handful of things here. Dangerous triggers. This one is the one that shows up in almost every time, and I bet William is like, every time he sees that anyone has a vulnerability that is related to GitHub Actions, it's like, does it have pull request target as a feature? And this one on open projects is particularly bad because it's basically saying that when someone else opens a PR on my repo, run this stuff. And they're running it against the fork and its workflow, not your own on your main branch. So that means that they can mess with the scripts that are going on, they can tamper with the release process, and if you have things that are configured, like your PyPI publishing key, they get access to that as part of their runner. This is really bad. You do not want to be using this. If you're looking at your workflow files today, if you see pull request target, you should significantly consider just deleting it. Just straight up get rid of it. GitHub should also just turn this feature off for public repositories. It is very dangerous when combined with all of the other foot guns that they have as features. And a little quick one here is archive uses. This one is people using actions that have been archived. They're just no longer going to be maintained. There's not going to be potential updates. There's about 3,000 workflows that are pointing at essentially a package that is like, this is never going to be changed ever again, and potentially might just break and die if GitHub continues to make changes on an ongoing basis. I pulled out some interesting kind of third-party action usage. So not just looking at like all of the first-party GitHub-provided actions, but ones made by other people, which are kind of definitely, like, we have the PyPI people, we trust them, we love them, they're doing good stuff, but they don't have quite the same security setup as GitHub, I suspect, and so there's still a bit of a risk there. They also, inside each one of these actions, it's basically a free-for-all for what you're actually running, right? There's a YAML configuration, but I didn't go deep into many things to go and see like what code is being installed. But inside this particular action, there are 7 different hosts that it reaches out to as part of the process, installing C, Python, PyPI, GraalPy, virtualenv, Node, NuGet. It's like, why do you need the C# package manager in here? I suspect there's some really crazy reason why that seems like a great idea, but all of those things aren't pinned. They're just pulling in like the version approximately that it would like. There's no kind of frozen lock file that says we're always going to keep pulling in the same thing. So you're getting extra kind of hidden levels of potential for things to go wrong that are coming through from these third-party actions. And then there's a load of different actions for publishing things. There's not just one. There's actually quite a few different actions that get used. And I'm really just showing like there are a wide selection of things here. So it's not like there's one central point that the whole community focuses on for improving how they go about publishing things, but actually lots of people using different ways and also like not pinning those things either. So they move around a lot. Luckily, GitHub has said, we are going to solve all of your problems. They published this blog post back in March, which basically says we're going to add lock files and pin the transitive dependencies of all of the actions. They've also said that they're going to ban the pull request target and scope the secrets down to make them more controlled. They gave some timelines of 3 to 9 months. They haven't specifically said like when we're going to do these things, so remains to be seen exactly when these things are going to land, but the risks are there today, and so there's still a problem right now. We can't wait 3 to 9 months for all of these features to be rolled out fully as well, because some of these things will have a timeline of like, we'll have this as a preview feature, not necessarily directly in production. But even then, they haven't promised to provide any malware detection on actions, to stop people from yanking or deleting particular actions. Did you know immutable actions doesn't stop you from deleting an action, it just stops you from changing that action. So those things can be deleted at any point, and then your action is still potentially going to break. They're not going to give you any kind of alerting about the CVEs of the things that are running in your workflows. And they're not really offering to enforce a lot of policy around those security advisories either. So there's a number of things there that are like, oh, this is like, we're still in a place where there's potentially lots of risk. So just to close out, want some practical hardening tips, and I've only got like 3 minutes, so we're going to go quick. There are basically 6 things that I think you should do, and you can kind of tell, like I've already pointed at all of them during this process. 1, you should use trusted publishing. Like, if you are publishing things as part of your workflow, definitely switch out ASAP. This is a great idea to be able to ensure like your tokens aren't available for other actions to take advantage of. Use zizmor. Not just use zizmor, but set zizmor up in your CI so that you're constantly checking. I've seen there has been vulnerabilities in the past where the repo has solved the problem, has fixed their configuration, and then someone else has rolled that back and therefore reintroduced the same security problem again. Having zizmor in your CI can block pull requests that would change and break your security configurations. I also found loads of good projects. Like, these are good examples. You can go and look at Python packages that have excellent CI configurations. These are ones that you can use as an example. And little interesting tidbit, I originally did this mining of data back in April, and I found that after the Trivy kind of crazy vulnerability that happened towards the middle of April, when I then went and remined some of these things, I thought, I wonder if this would actually change and move the community at all. It did. So I remined a lot of these packages, especially the critical ones, the ones that have, like the top 1% of packages. We saw about a 15% drop in the usage of some of the dangerous features of GitHub Actions. But interestingly then, when I scanned them again in May, we went up a little bit. And I don't think that is those packages reversing, but instead that there are new packages and that are adopting some of these things that would otherwise have been more secure beforehand. So, just to reiterate on these takeaways, GitHub Actions is absolutely full of foot guns. And you want to be really careful about how you can configure it, because you can accidentally set yourself up to have an insecure setup. Use zizmor. Zizmor is wonderful. Be cautious of when you're using third-party actions, like extra caution in adopting any action that is from a third party. Make sure that you have trusted publishing set up. That is an excellent way to ensure that your tokens are very unlikely to be stolen and reused. And kill pull request target with fire. Like, that thing needs to burn. Thank you very much. I also wanted to say, we should absolutely consider supporting zizmor and William financially and help be able to get more contributors onto this project, because he's basically carrying it by himself. And it's amazing. And I wanted to give him another round of applause because he's doing great work. It's not just the Python ecosystem he supports, but every ecosystem, every language that uses GitHub Actions should be using zizmor, and a lot of them do. And I'll just leave you on cycling poodles so we can all have a little calm down after that craziness. Thank you very much.